Yay.
Welcome, everybody. This is the Life Enthusiast Hangout on the Life Enthusiast Health online network, restoring vitality to you and to the planet. I'm Scott Patton. Joining us, as usual, is Martin Patella, the lead health coach at Life Enthusiast. Hey, Martin, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Wonderful. And today, I would like to bring on board with us Dr. Carrie Drizga. Dr. Carrie is a double header, naturopath and chiropractor and Bachelor of Science, and actually in real active practice. So she sees people day in, day out in her office. Plus, she is an author of a book, a really cool book that addresses the most common problem that she has been seeing in her office, people coming to her with fatigue. But as usual, Dr. Heal Thyself, she first had to overcome her own problems with fatigue. But I will let her explain it to you. Here you go. Dr. Carrie, how are you tonight?
I'm great, guys. How are you?
It's all good. And still above ground, on the right side of grass.
That's a good attitude.
So really, so you're actually working naturopathic and chiropractic. How do you split it?
Well, I guess really my practice is mainly about doing functional medicine. And functional medicine is about looking at the whole body because it's all connected together and really getting to the root underlying cause of where the health problem is coming from. So within that model, both naturopathic medicine and chiropractic fit beautifully actually together. So when a patient comes in for their first visit, we're together for about an hour trying to figure out where the health problems are actually coming from. And so that's usually just the beginning of this whole journey of trying to get them back to actually being healthy again. So functional medicine is not like some kind of a Band-Aid approach. It's a journey that we take together to try and really get your health back.
Yes. I mean, I work in the same principles. I mean, I don't know if you remember my story, but it started 30 years ago when I fell apart thanks to some mercury poisoning. And I was first going to the mainstream doctors and then to chiropractic and then to naturopathic. And in the end, most of them were simply practicing symptoms-oriented medicine. And indeed, it was only when I actually had to invent functional medicine. I fixed myself, and then I realized that it was functional medicine that I was using to fix myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then just yesterday, I looked up functional medicine on Wikipedia. One day, amuse yourself and do it. It was written by some mainstream doctors who are saying that the so-called practice of functional medicine has these unproven methods that deliver questionable results.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Well, that's not true at all.
Yeah, let's dive into
this. Don't trust everything that you read on Wikipedia.
That is very sad because I thought we could trust it. This old and still naive. Okay, so functional medicine. So we find the cause. I mean, the wonderful thing that you just said was I spend an hour with a person figuring out the origins of their trouble. So
yeah,
what's the sort of...
Sorry. So yeah, that's the first visit is sitting down for an hour, really getting their history. I kind of describe it like being a health detective. Like if you ever watch CSI, I don't know, I love that show. But it's trying to gather the clues to break the case wide open, and it's never easy. No matter what the patient is coming in with, it's never easy. It's a step-by-step process to try and really uncover what's going on. So that all doesn't happen on the first visit, but the first visit is an hour, and typically for most patients that's like a radically different approach because they're used to going to their family doctor for like a 10-minute appointment and being told you can only have one complaint.
Right, and then of course they try to find the silver bullet, and of course most illnesses that people have these days don't respond to a silver bullet because you need to deal with 20 different things, not a single symptom for which you have a single pill, right?
That's right. That's right.
So tell more about it. Like, what is the sort of thing that shows up in your office? What complaints do people bring to you?
You know, I see a lot of patients, obviously, with fatigue because I wrote a book on fatigue. So I see a lot of those kind of patients. A lot of people that have brain fog, depression, anxiety, insomnia, hormone imbalances, digestive problems. It could be heartburn or reflux, just bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritable bowel, chronic pain. I love seeing chronic pain patients because then I can really marry my naturopathic and my chiropractic background together. And also a lot of autoimmune problems. Like, these are all areas that mainstream medicine really doesn't have a lot of solutions for. And so it's like these areas are not really being addressed. And so I guess that's typically the kind of health problems that I see in my office.
Well, we better get our clients to get to know your book, because clearly they will be able to get a whole bunch of answers quickly, right?
Yeah, in my book, I outline 8 of the 14 root causes of fatigue. I like to call them the fatigue factors. And one of the nicest things that I heard about my book from people that have read it is that they, over and over again, they tell me that it's just really easy to read. It's not full of the technical doctory language like most books written by doctors are. And in the book, I talk about my own personal fatigue story, and I include stories from 4 other fatigue cases from my private practice so that the reader can see that, okay, we have 5 here struggling with fatigue, 5 patients here struggling with fatigue, but they all had a bit of a different treatment and a bit of a different avenue of really where the root underlying cause was coming from.
Right. So you need to find it, whether it's the hormonal or the nutritional or the toxicity or combination of things that are creating this perfect storm of unhealth, right?
Right, exactly.
Yep. Yeah, I do that every day as my metabolic typing advisor hat on, trying to help people understand that what works for your neighbor is not necessarily going to work for you.
Right, and that's one of the real beauties about functional medicine is that, I mean, patients know that we're all each unique and individual, and so functional medicine really embraces that, and really it is an individual approach because everybody really is different, and there is no one size fits all.
Yes. This was an interesting conversation I would like to quote. I was talking to a friend, and he said to me, well, how do you prove these solutions? And I said, well, let me introduce you to the fallacy of the double-blind study. When you create a sample on which you're going to apply your randomized treatment, how do you know whether these were fast oxidizers or slow oxidizers, autonomics or parasympathetics? One will respond in one way, the other will respond in another way. So depending on the selection of your sample, you will try your solution. And if your sample was skewed in one way, you will get a positive, and if it was skewed the other way, you will get a negative result.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do you do testing, or how do you figure out people what to do for them?
So part of it is just getting the history and getting the background. Like, what was that moment where you've never been well since? And so that'll kind of give me an idea of where I might need to go. So for example, I have this patient, Ashley, she lives in Guelph, and we do phone appointments. And she has tremendous bloating and digestive problems and hormonal imbalance. And when I really dug in with her history, I said, have you ever had any food poisoning? Any like food poisoning or like the stomach flu? And she said, oh yeah, I had it like really bad in 2005. And I said, okay, well that's really interesting because like 6 months later, to a year later, that's when you said your hormonal problem started. And she's like, oh my God, yeah, you're right. So sometimes I can kind of pull it out in the history, and then I know the next step that I need to take. And with patients, I'm always looking over their blood work because, Martin, for the most part, they've already seen their family doctor. They've already seen a specialist or two. So they already have blood work that's already been done. So I usually get that, and I kind of look that over to see what are those numbers. Are they just like okay, or are they really ideal for health? And then I often find that there's blood work that's missing. Like very typically, vitamin D in Canada is like never run anymore because the healthcare system doesn't pay for it. So the doctors just say, well, you don't need it.
Yeah, why test it? I can't give it to you on a prescription, so who cares?
Yeah.
You know, that's one of my other proverbs. Things get done because they're insured, not because they're necessary.
You're exactly right.
Yeah, I remember I had my 12 fillings put in my mouth, not because I needed them, but because I was willing to let the dentist go at it. Because I didn't care. Insurance was covering it.
Mm-hmm.
I was stupid enough to let it happen.
Yeah, so a lot of healthcare, especially in the States, gets dictated by insurance. And I know that because I'm born and raised in Chicago. Even though now I'm living in Canada, I do know both healthcare systems. And they both have their flaws.
Yep.
But in my office, when I'm doing testing, I'm usually doing testing that I'm usually using tests that are not available to the doctors because it's just not part of their scope of practice, I guess you would say. Or
Yep.
So a lot of the tests that I'll do, like stool testing or saliva testing, will get sent off to special labs in the U.S. because they're just not available in Canada. So these are some of the tools that I use to try and really figure out where the root cause is.
So you actually work with people remotely, yes?
I do, and it was really fun because yesterday I had a Skype call with a patient in Cairo. So I can now say I'm an international doctor, and it was really cool. So this is one of the great things about the internet and having Skype and having Google Hangouts is that it's totally changing medicine as we know it. So it was really fun being able to speak with a patient in Cairo and being able to help him.
So if we had some life enthusiast clients that just aren't getting the kind of help they would like, you might be willing to come on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they could call my office, go through the new patient application process. So basically, in my office, it's really different. Patients will apply to be a patient. So they'll fill out an application. I'll review it to see, am I really the right doctor or the best doctor to treat this patient or not? Because if I'm not, I don't want to waste that patient's time, and I want to try and find a better doctor for them. So we usually go through an application process like that, and then if I think, yes, I can definitely help that patient, then we'll get them in the office for their appointment. Or we do it remotely like this.
Great.
So I'm kind of curious. You've been a chiropractor and doing this for almost 2 decades. Have you noticed anything from when you started to now that sort of changed, like more people with no energy or more people with a third ear, or I'm not sure what. I'm just wondering if there's anything.
Third ear. I've never seen a third ear, but actually I've seen some radical changes. So part of that question I can't really answer because my practice has totally evolved. Like for the first 15 years I was doing purely chiropractic, and I really didn't like it. And then I went back to school, got my naturopathic degree so that I could really do true functional medicine, which I love doing. So part of that is just I'm seeing a totally different patient base. So I can't really answer that. But I have noticed, I would say within the last, especially 10 years, that people have really become attuned to wanting an alternative, that they know that there is a problem that they're not being helped with, and they are really now searching it out. So I started noticing that shift about 10 years ago. And then, like, I don't remember when Dr. Oz when his program came on the air. But, you know, when you really think about it, a program like Dr. Oz being on the air, which I don't always agree with everything that he says, but just the fact that he's on the air, it's tremendous.
Yep, totally agree. I think that we're seeing things because of the three causes. One is the new wheat, which started in the 70s, and then the genetically modified foods,
Mhm.
especially the glyphosate presence in the foods. I think it's breaking people's digestive systems faster than anything. I think we're seeing
Absolutely.
a lot more and more of the leaky gut related issues. And then I think the histamine reactions are coming up more often than not.
Hmm. Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with all those things. Yeah.
yeah. So I guess the cause is the industrial medicine, pardon me, I meant industrial foods, is causing the problems that we see in the medicine now, right?
Right. There's industrialized agriculture. There's, I think, just in North America, our attitude that we work, 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 and we're under so much stress, and we don't take time and we don't really value our health until we lose it. And
Yeah.
so I think well, it's just a combination of things, but you're right. One of the biggest factors is the whole industrialization of our food.
So there, Scott. What else do you want to say about that? You know, I would like to comment on chiropractic. I think it's the most wonderful profession in that sense that when you undo the blocked pathways, all of a sudden you start nourishing parts of the nervous system that previously were just not getting either the signal or the nourishment, and things go for the better.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and I'll say that being a chiropractor for 15 years, I wasn't happy because I just didn't feel like I was being challenged. Like it was boring to me. So it has nothing to do with like chiropractic not having value because it has tremendous value. In fact, my husband, he's a second generation chiropractor. He grew up on chiropractic, so he's never been vaccinated. He's never had to take like antibiotics. He's never really been on any medication. And whenever he had a health problem, his father would adjust him. Have a fever, he would get adjusted. Have a bellyache, he would get adjusted. And honest to God, he is a typical like milk and cookies kind of guy. His diet is not great, although it's gotten better, you know, since we've been married. But he is the healthiest person that I know. So chiropractic itself, oh my gosh, it has tremendous value, and I don't think people really know that. They just think of it like, oh, I have a back problem, I'll see a chiropractor. Oh, I have a headache, I'll see a chiropractor. But I don't think they really truly grasp the global effect that it has on your health.
I agree because I go see my chiropractor 2 to 3 times a month, and how I feel before and after is just a night and day. So I think we do
Mhm.
a lot, particularly if you're sitting and you're working on your computer a lot and you're hunched over and everything else, it's going to see the chiropractor is going to save your back.
Yep, not
Yes.
just the back. You know what's interesting? I spent hundreds, no, thousands, I don't know what. I've been to chiropractors so much that I forget the count. Because when I first started falling apart back in my mercury poisoning episode, I was going 2 and 3 times a week just to maintain
Hmm.
because I was just falling apart every day. But what's interesting is that ever since I had the Atlas prophylax procedure done on me,
Hmm.
I don't need to go.
Hmm.
I actually have full flow. So I don't know. Are you familiar with that thing? Have you ever heard of it?
I have heard of it. It's not anything that I've been trained on, but I have heard about it and that it
Yeah.
can have tremendous results.
Yeah, it's quite rare, but anybody who's born with the primary misalignment between the skull and the first vertebra, the atlas, uh, is, well, I was one of those.
Hmm.
So when it got corrected, all of a sudden, I was no longer having to go every 10 days because I stopped losing the adjustment.
Hmm.
That was
That's
amazing.
fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So we seem to be in an energy crisis. Everybody that we talk to is tired, dragging their butts around. What are some of the reasons you think that's the case?
You mean like what I would consider the fatigue factors, like I spoke about in my book, or
Yes.
what even underlies that?
Yeah, particularly the fatigue factors that you talked about in your book.
Okay, so some of the things that I commonly see are nutrient deficiencies. I just briefly mentioned vitamin D earlier because the doctors in Canada don't even test for it. So definitely nutrient deficiencies, and then a lot of people have hidden food sensitivities to foods they eat on a daily basis that they really don't realize is just sucking energy from their body. There can be hidden infections like parasite infections or bacterial overgrowth or yeast overgrowth. Like that patient that I was brought up earlier who had tremendous bloating and gas and hormonal imbalances. And really, the root cause of that was a gut infection going on. And then there can be other things like adrenal imbalance, blood sugar imbalances. And then one of the things that really that was a real big impetus for my healing with my fatigue was figuring out my brain chemistry imbalance. So that kind of gives you an idea of some of the root causes, and of course, underlying that, we always want to address the basic lifestyle factors, like making sure you're eating a healthy diet, a diet that's right for you, and that you're getting exercise, the right kind for you, and that you're getting good sleep, and you're doing stress management, drinking, and you're hydrated with good amounts of water. All of those basic factors are the real foundation. So, I mean, I like to tell patients you could take a handful of the best supplements in the world, but you got to address your diet and all of those basic factors, or you're not going to really get that far.
Yeah, you're just going through the four pillars of health that we defined in the book that we put out, which was toxicity, malnutrition, stagnation, and disruption of the subtle kind, the invisible electric things.
Mm-hmm.
And we just gone over them again and again and again.
Yeah. And I know that you guys know this, and probably a lot of your viewers and listeners know that some of what we're saying is not actually new, that we're just repeating over and over again because it is the foundation.
So I guess what we'll have to do is start doing classes for people to figure out what's wrong with them.
Yes. Yeah, because the society as a whole is not getting any healthier.
Yeah, how do I know what to do first, right?
Yes, that's always the thing, is how do I know what to do first? Sometimes even I don't know what to do first, but I just put my stake in the ground and say, we have to start somewhere, so let's start here.
Great. Pulling an empty window here. I don't know, I forgot to watch for time, so I don't want to keep stretching the show just for the sake of stretching the show. But I'd love to get some more of your wisdom from the day-to-day, where just the sort of specific things that you ask people to ask themselves, or what is it that they should try and figure out first. Like, I hear you talk about, food intolerances. I would think, in my head, the light bulb's going off, and I'm thinking, okay, have you been off gluten yet? Or are you still on dairy without knowing whether you are okay with it or not? Those kind of questions.
Exactly. So when it comes to the diet, those are things that I ask. And a lot of people have tried diet changes, and then there's a certain amount that have not tried any diet changes. And there are some very there's a list of what is considered the most common food sensitivities, and it's wheat and dairy and eggs and soy and corn and sugar and chocolate and yeast, I think is what the list is. I mean, as a person out there that you want to try and improve your health, you could remove those things from your diet and then add them in one at a time to see if that makes a difference, if you feel better off of it and feel worse on it. And then there's more sophisticated like food sensitivity testing, like doing blood work, which is not always accurate.
Oh
So
dear.
sometimes when foods are irritating a person, sometimes it's because they're having an immune response and it's a true like sensitivity. But sometimes foods can be irritating to a person because they're just not digesting it well. And that would never be picked up on a food sensitivity test. So really the gold standard is the elimination diet.
Good. Scott, have you gone away? It's
No, I just muted my mic because I'm in this hotel in Salmon Arm, and there's people running around, banging around, and I just didn't want it to interfere with everything that we're listening to. And
I need you.
and it's pretty fascinating.
Sorry, I need you to be more of a director here because I have no clue how long we've been talking.
Well, probably another 10 minutes, and then we should sign off. So tell us a little bit more about why you started writing your book, Dr. Carey.
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to tell you about that. So I guess a big impetus for the book was really my own personal fatigue story. So basically, after being in practice as a chiropractor for 15 years, I had decided to go back to school to get a degree in naturopathic medicine so that I could really expand my scope of practice. And I got to tell you, it was nuts what I did. So I'm living in Canada, but then I'm going to school in Chicago, and I'm in school 30 hours a week, plus exams, plus papers, plus studying. But then I'm trying to maintain my practice in Ottawa, so I'm like flying back and forth. It was just like an insane schedule for 2 years. And about 6 months into the program is when my fatigue started, like to really hit me. And I knew it was really because of all of the stress that I was putting my body under. It was like burning the candle at both ends and short-term pain for long-term gain. So I was just sucking it up and just push myself through the program, medicating myself with coffee and sugar and whatever I could. And then my attitude was, well, once I graduate and I do my board exams and like life gets back to normal, well, I just need to get, really good sleep and the fatigue will be gone. So basically, once I graduated and took my board exams, I would sleep like 10 hours a night, and every day I would take a 2-hour nap. And I did this for 3 months, and my fatigue did not go away. And that's why I realized, and I should say the other part on top of this is I started seeing patients again in my office, and I couldn't remember their names. I couldn't remember why they were coming to see me. I couldn't remember what their health complaints were. I had to look in my file and refer to my notes at every single visit. And so my short-term memory was like shot. And that was really scary for me. And so this is at the point then when I started to treat myself, and doctors were told like never to treat yourself. But I started treating myself and applying functional medicine to myself. And I did a saliva test, and my adrenals were like flatline, total adrenal exhaustion, which wasn't a surprise. I went on a gluten-free diet, and that helped. I did a stool test, and I found that I had parasites, probably that I got from one of my dogs. I treated that, and my energy got a little bit better. And then the thing that really changed everything was working on my brain chemistry, getting my serotonin and dopamine in balance. And once I figured out my cocktail of amino acids that I needed to take, honestly, within 7 days, it was like the lights were shining bright again in my mind. Like all the neurons were firing again. It's really hard to describe, but it's like, man, I finally hit the nail on the head, and that's really what was a root underlying cause of my fatigue. And
Wow.
so when I had that, then I decided I really need to share this with other people, because there's other people out there struggling just as I was and not getting any help.
So the amino acids that you were using, was it just individual free-form aminos?
Yeah, specific free-form amino acids, 5-HTP and tyrosine. And there's a testing by Dr. Marty Hinz. He's in Duluth, Minnesota, and it's called MTO testing, or monoamine transporter optimization. And it's basically urine testing along with taking amino acid supplements to try and figure out the right balance of amino acids to try and get that dopamine and serotonin into balance for you. So that worked for me tremendously.
So you had to do several cycles of that, sending your urine in to see how it's going?
There were several cycles, but actually it was after the second round that I noticed the most improvement. So it was pretty fast, actually.
Cool.
So have you found that, so basically what you're saying is I was really tired, I slept a lot, didn't change anything, and then I went through this process. So it worked for you. And the question I have is, would it work for somebody else? Like, would that process work, although obviously it may be, maybe they are only getting 3 hours sleep a night, they need to get more. I mean, obviously everyone's individual, but do you think that process is one that a lot of people that are really tired, it's because, I've got too much yeast, too many parasites, too much of the wrong bacteria, my head is just totally out of whack, and I'm missing a bunch of amino acids, and I'm only getting 3 hours sleep?
Well, if you're only getting 3 hours sleep, so one of the things, that's a great question, because a lot of people have fatigue because they're not sleeping. And if they're not sleeping, that's usually the first thing that I tackle. Not that that's easy to get them sleeping again regularly, but it's the first thing that I tackle, because I know once they get sleeping, that in and of itself is going to help their fatigue. But with your question, yeah, actually I do find a lot of my patients that have fatigue, a lot of them suffer from a certain amount of cortisol imbalance. They do suffer from a certain amount of blood sugar imbalance. We could say that everybody has a gluten intolerance because gluten is indigestible to humans. There's a lot of people that have hidden infections, and they have no idea that, after taking one round of antibiotics, that it's going to screw up your intestines for like 4 years after. That's in the hard research. So there are a lot of similarities, but even with that, we can't just take a general approach to a patient that comes in. Then we still have to take a very streamlined individual approach.
Right. You're not going to say, okay, take this bottle, this bottle, this bottle, and this bottle, and you'll be fine. Obviously, we're all individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of curious about, you said something about like hidden infections. So can you expand on that a little bit? And how would someone know that, okay, I'm really tired and I'm dragging my butt all day. Okay, so I probably do. But someone who thinks that they're fairly active and okay probably still also has hidden infections. So how are some of the ways that we could tell, or what are some of the ways we could do to get rid of those infections? And what do you mean by an infection? Because to me, I have a cut on my hand, it's red and pussy and everything else. Obviously, it's infected, but what's a hidden one?
That's a great question. So first off, how would you know? Hidden infections won't always give you obvious symptoms. Like if you have an infection, it could be a parasite that's living in your intestines, or it could be yeast overgrowth, or it could be bacterial overgrowth, too much bad bacteria, not enough good bacteria. And you won't necessarily have any obvious symptoms like digestive-wise. You might have constipation or bloating or gas or diarrhea, but you won't necessarily have any of that. You might just have hormonal imbalance. In fact, I treat a lot of women in my practice, and across the board, the women who have the worst hormonal imbalance, and that could be menopause problems or fertility problems, or they've stopped having their periods altogether, that usually the root cause of that is a gut infection going on. screwing up the rest of the body. So you won't necessarily have any digestive symptoms. In fact, you might not have any symptoms at all, apart from just, not feeling at your 100% best. And I think a lot of people would just kind of shrug that off too. Well, I'm just getting older, and that's just a part of getting older. Well, no, that's not a part of getting older. There's probably something going on, and often the root causes of why a person gets an infection is, one of them I mentioned earlier was antibiotics. That it is known in research that one round of antibiotics will cause imbalance in your intestines for 4 years after. And I like to explain this to patients, especially the women. They really get this. Like, typically when a woman goes on a round of antibiotics, then they end up with a vaginal yeast infection, yeast overgrowth. And when they have that, I say great, because they have found the source of their yeast overgrowth. But most of the time what happens is they get yeast overgrowth in the intestines and they have no idea. But months or years later, they start getting migraines or joint pain, or their hair is starting to go thin, or they're getting rashes. And really, with functional medicine, the root cause might be a hidden infection. So there's antibiotics. Another big one is just stress, that when we put our body through stress, and that could be mental, emotional stress, that could be stress from eating a crappy diet, too many carbs, too much sugar, too much junk food, too much alcohol, all that kind of stuff. And it could also be the stress of chronic inflammation or chronic pain in the body that weakens your first line of defense and makes it easier for you to develop. And when an invader comes in, when a bacteria comes in, if there's nothing that's pushing them away and saying, get out, they're going to just come in and have a party. It's like have a house party when the parents are gone. So those are two of the most common ways that people get gut infections.
Well, the bad news for me is I spent 3 weeks in a hospital and basically had tubes coming in and out of my arms, and one of which was antibiotics. So you've made me worry about the next 4 years. Fortunately, Martin has some very, very good probiotics that he's been taking a tube and sticking it into my neck and force feeding me. So.
Oh, I'm sure those antibiotics probably saved your life, though, Scott.
Exactly.
So we can't, like, a lot of people assume that I'm anti-medicine, and I'm not anti-medicine, because there is a time and a place for medication. And antibiotics, of all the medications, have saved so many lives across the board.
Yeah.
But what we know, the after effects of antibiotics, we can't ignore that. We need to treat that.
Well, the awareness gives us a plan of action to move forward, right? Like if I had ignored it and my digestive system was all out of whack, then over the next 4 years we'd probably see a real decrease in my all sorts of areas, who knows, and no understanding of why. But if I know, hey, this is really going to be screwing up the bacteria in my system and everything else, I can take more probiotics and I can take more good, yogurts and all that sort of stuff to kind of replace it. And at least I'm taking some action in the positive direction as opposed to wondering.
Exactly.
Yes. So there we are, preaching to the choir. I certainly hope that the audience that is watching this, listening to it, are getting the idea of what's important here. And it seems to be the basics, right? Like if you could only eat more of the old style fermented foods, for instance, you might have a better flora in the gut. And if you could just eat the old-fashioned, I don't know what to call it, the foods prepared before we invented food preservation and canning and all that business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's so beautifully convenient, right? It's so beautifully convenient to have all these foods that have these conserving agents, and they are non-spoiling. so they're cheaper than they've ever been, but they seem to be producing more health challenge than ever before.
And one of the things that I've noticed too, Martin, is that the art of cooking is dying. And
Yes.
people these days don't know how to cook anymore because they've been raised on, well, you just buy it at the store in a box, you open it, you shove it in the oven or you shove it in the microwave, and voila, you have a meal.
Right
And I
on.
found that particularly challenging within my practice, that when a patient comes in and they're not used to cooking, it makes it particularly challenging for them to get their health back because it's just such a big hurdle.
Yes, I got it. Well, I guess you could start promoting raw foodist. You just get them a blender. That's that. There's
Well,
your appliance.
going raw food is not necessarily the answer.
No, no, I know it for a fact. And yet, but I'm saying, right? Get a blender. That's your first appliance.
Yeah, and actually, I mean that's kind of funny that you say that, but there is some truth to that. That often the easiest first step for them to make is to do a really good healthy smoothie. So at least it's a step in the right direction, and so then we just slowly build on that.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
I got dropped off for some reason, but I'm back, and we're getting towards the end of our time together, and I really want to throw a hardball question at you because it's in the news right now. It's not a good idea to go to Disneyland because there's a measles epidemic there, and just wanted to know what your thoughts were on children getting the measles, A, and B, what you can do once you get it, or what you should do to make sure that you don't get it, if that's possible.
So I guess first off, about children getting the measles. Usually measles is a self-limiting illness. It's very rare that measles becomes so terrible to the point where it would be life-threatening. So because oftentimes measles is self-limiting, which would, the common cold is, we would call that self-limiting. The flu is self-limiting. You'll be sick for a period of time and then you'll get better. Usually something like that, for me personally, I wouldn't be that scared about my child contracting the measles. But then I also have to say, I don't have children. My children are two four-legged furry animals. So, but if I did have kids, I wouldn't be that worried about it. And a lot of it also is getting their immune systems strong also. So if you're planning a trip to Disneyland or Disney World or wherever, because the thing is, there are viruses and bacteria everywhere. It's how do you get your immune system stronger in order to be better able to deal with something like that. Because the thing is, we cannot run away from these microorganisms. In fact, we literally need them to survive. So I think we've become such a society of phobia against bacteria, and we wash our hands, and it's got antimicrobials in the hand soap, and then you got to do your Purell, and you got to kill everything on your hands. Well, that's not good. That's also what's part of what's making people sick.
So I guess there seems to be a big difference between life-threatening and inconvenient, and we were originally inoculating against life-threatening, like the smallpox, chickenpox, that were really serious trouble. Whereas now we're into the convenience, like, no, we don't want to have my child to come down with this particular illness because that means that I'll have to stay home from work for 2 weeks.
Yeah, what I think a lot of people don't realize too is when the vaccine movement started, at about the same time, proper healthy sanitation also started, where people were becoming accustomed to having clean drinking water, and
Right.
because those things happened at the same time, just the fact of having clean drinking water that in and of itself had a huge impact on the health of society.
Right, it
So,
stopped the transmission quite a lot.
Well,
yeah.
the other thing that happened at that time that you just made me realize was refrigeration. Like we had, you'd had boxes of ice from the winter. If it all melted because it was a hot spring, then you had meat hanging in the air with flies going around and in the sun, and you just chalked up a bunch of that and ate it. Well, eating rotten meat's not going to be very helpful.
Yeah, somewhere along the way we, I think, may have lost the connection.
Exactly. So I think a lot of people they think vaccination is the be-all, end-all. And you got to be careful because it's not. And like I said earlier, my husband has never been vaccinated. In fact, I remember being in chiropractic school, and we had a guest speaker come in, and the guest speaker asked our entire class, this is like 120 of us students in this class, asked us, how many in here have never been vaccinated? And 2 people raised their hand, and one of them, ended up becoming my husband. And at that time, I was just shocked. I was like, oh my God, how could you never have been vaccinated? What is wrong with your parents, right? Because I bought, the story hook, line, and sinker, but now that I've educated myself, I realize that vaccination is not the be-all, end-all. There's other factors, like you were saying, Scott, about the refrigeration, like we were talking about just having good, healthy, clean, sanitized water, and how these other things had such a big impact on public health.
All right.
So I think we've come to the end of our time together. Dr. Carey, I want to thank you very much for joining us, and tell everybody where they can get a hold of your book and find out more about your practice.
We'll post the links up too.
Oh, okay. I guess I have a lot of websites, so I guess my home base, where you can find my blog and my podcast and my book, and then I have a new program coming out called Entrepreneurial Fatigue: How to Fuel Your Brain and Body for Entrepreneurial Success, and then coming soon is Dr. Carey TV. I got a lot going on. My home base for all of that is at drcarey.com, and that's spelled drcarri.com.
Great. We'll put a link up here so everybody can see it, as well as the link down there in the description.
Perfect.
Get you regardless how they find it.
Awesome. I am certainly looking forward to the customer feedback. If they want to hear more of your stories, we'll hear about it. I certainly hope that you enjoyed the time with us.
I did. I did enjoy my time. Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Scott, for having me on. This was a lot of fun, and it was my first Google Hangout. So there we go.
You did a great job. So thanks for joining us, everybody. You've been listening to and watching the Life Enthusiast Co-op Google Hangout Network, restoring vitality to you and the planet. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.